are so many misconceptions that people have about God, but I think that the most common one is that people say God says for us not to judge. Not just followers of Christ, but everyone. God tells everyone, don't judge. And we see that here. They're speaking from Matthew chapter 7, right at the beginning, verse 1. And I have it written down for you here, right? Let's underline this here in blue, right? He says, judge not that you be not judged. So are they wrong in saying that God says not to judge? Are people wrong when they say God says not to judge? No. He says it right here, don't judge. But that's not where he stops. God does say don't judge. But if you continue reading that passage, he's actually telling you how to judge, not simply not to judge. So he says, so it's 1 through 5. You can read the whole thing in the Bible, Matthew 7, 1 through 5. I have here some key verses from 1 through 5, which is 1, 3, and 5. So let's keep looking at verse 3. Why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but do not consider the plank in your own eye? So what is he saying? He's saying, why are you judging somebody's sin and you're not considering your own? And the way he's describing that somebody's sin is as a speck. And the way he's describing your sin or our sin is as a plank, which is much worse. So he's alluding to the fact that often when people judge, they may be judging something that is pretty insignificant about another person, and when I say we, I mean the people who judge, when we're judging them, we have our own very significant sins that we need to bring to God. So, and that is often the case. I mean, it takes a person with a lot of bravado to come out and flat out judge someone for the biggest sin in their life. A lot of the time, we don't judge someone for the worst thing they've ever done. A lot of the times, we judge someone for something really petty. And when we're judging someone for something really petty, Jesus is saying, how can you judge someone for something so petty when you in your own life have so much sin that you need to bring to me, to the cross? Well, he doesn't say it here, but that's essentially what we need to do with our own sin, right? With our plank, which is our sin. And plank would be a big sin. And that's not to say, right, that this person, right, your brothers, that's not to say that their only sin is like specks. It's just to say, like what I was saying before, that when we judge, we only judge in a really insignificant way. We only bother them for insignificant things or things that really don't matter much, when in our own lives we need to address a lot of things that matter. We need to address that plank. And even so, right, even if we had that bravado and everybody had that bravado to flat out point out somebody's worst sin and judge them for their worst sin, that doesn't mean that we're not hypocrites. That doesn't mean that, because we still also have our own sin, right? Our own huge sin. Everybody has it. So what is he saying? So what does he continue to say? Well, he concludes in verse 5, right? To remove the plank that is in your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck that is in your brother's eye. So he's saying you need to address your sin, whether it be private, public, whatever, with God. And you need to mature with God spiritually. Obviously, you need to mature spiritually and grow out of your sin, so that then you can go ahead and remove the speck that is in your brother's eye. Which is what? When you're removing the speck that is in your brother's eye, that's judging, right? That's judgment. Now, the judgment would be productive, because to remove a speck in somebody's eye, if we're going to read that in a literal way, when you're removing a speck that is in someone's eye, let's say I have something in my eye and you take it out for me, I'm going to be very grateful. Oh, thank you so much. That was actually very painful. Thank you for taking that out. So when you judge, it has to be productive, and it has to help that person. You have to do it in a way that's helpful and beneficial to them, right? I guess that's the same thing, helpful, beneficial. You have to do it in a way that's going to, there's a better word than helpful or beneficial. You have to do it in a way that they'll be grateful for, in a way that is just warm and affectionate. You know, when I've got something stuck in my eye and you see it, you're not just gonna yank it out of my eye, because that's gonna hurt a lot. So if I've got something stuck in my eye, especially the eyes, this is a great example that he says here, and he's talking about the eyes. Eyes are very delicate, and you have to be very careful when you have anything. When you have, I only know how to say it in Spanish. Oh, a sty. When you have a sty in your eye, you have to be very careful when you're taking that out. When you're putting contacts in, you have to wash your hands. So you have to be very delicate with people's eyes. The eye is a very delicate thing. You have to be very delicate. So when he says remove the speck that once you've grown spiritually, and once you don't have that plank anymore that was in your eye, and then he says to remove the speck that is in your brother's eye. I mean, you got to think about how delicate an eye is. And even though it's just a speck, you still have to be very careful with anything. I mean, I just mentioned contacts. It seems really, contacts are something that people use daily. They just put them in, take them out, whatever. But you have to wash your hands, and you have to make sure your contacts are clean. And if your contact lens has like the smallest tear, it feels like glass in your eye. That's how sensitive eyes are. So keep that in mind when you do mature and you want to help other people, when you want to start help people remove the speck and the dirt in their eye, meaning like their soul. Right? When you want to help people, keep in mind that you have to be delicate when you do this. So I'm going to just write here, be delicate when you do this. And obviously, like I said before, you have to be mature. You have to be spiritually mature to do this, right? So I'll write that here too. You must be spiritually that looks wrong, but I think I spelled it right. You must be spiritually mature to judge or I'll do it over here. Help others remove sin from their life. So does God say not to judge? That you can't judge? No. Matthew 7, 1 through 5 he tells you this is about, I'm gonna write it up here, how to judge. That's what he does. That's what he teaches you. He teaches you how to judge. Because as Frank Turek, I don't know if you guys know who Frank Turek is. He wrote this amazing book called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. And he gives lectures, and you can find them on YouTube. Just type in Frank Turek. I'll write his name down here. I'll do it in black. So Frank Turek. He famously said in that book, I think it's like this, his name. He famously said in that book of his that to say don't judge is a judgment within itself, right? It's a self-defeating argument. You can't tell someone you can't judge me or don't judge that person because that's a judgment within itself. You're judging me for judging that person. So it doesn't make sense. You can't tell someone don't judge because then you would be a hypocrite. Because that's exactly what you're doing. You're doing the same thing that you're telling me not to do. It's a self-defeating argument. It doesn't make sense. And that's why Jesus doesn't simply say not to judge. He says how to judge. I didn't want to go through every verse. I didn't want this to be super, super long. But if you continue reading verses 1 through 5, yeah, he starts here with, because you might be thinking now, why does he say judge not that you not be judged, but then says how to judge? Well, this is just an opening line. He says, judge not that you may not be judged. And he says it in that way and continues to say that the way that you judge is how you will be judged. And the measure that you use will be measured onto you, right? So the way you judge people is how God is going to judge you. Or maybe how others judge you. Might not be how God judges you. God has a lot of grace and God might have grace on you. More than likely, I would say he does and won't judge you the same way you judge other people. But certainly other people are going to judge you the way you judge them or even worse. And he says the measure that you use, which is basically the same thing, the measure that you use will be used onto you. So it's the same thing. The way you do it, they're going to do it to you. And I think probably even worse because they're going to be upset that you did it. So then he goes ahead in verse 3 and 5, 4 and 5. And he's saying, don't judge this way, right? He says, right? So he's basically saying, don't judge this way. I'll get purple. He says, this is, don't judge this way. And what he was saying before that was also the same thing, right? So what is said in verse 3 supports what is said in verse 2, what he says in verse 2. And you can go ahead and read it. He says, don't judge for the measure you judge. For the way you judge people are going to judge you. And then he goes ahead and continues to say ways not to judge. So he says it literally, and that he says literally, don't judge that way, right? This is, if you judge this way, this is what's going to happen. So he's speaking very literally. And now he's giving you a picture. Don't do it, right? And then he doesn't just stop there. Then he teaches. Then he teaches you how, which is, you know, through this right here, right? This is how to judge. So I hope that clears up, and let me highlight this. I hope that clears up any confusion you had about this verse, this passage. Maybe I'll do another video doing it in depth, but I really just wanted to, I didn't want this to be a whole teaching on Matthew 7, 1 through 5 and every single verse and everything like that. Like, I didn't want to go through it verse by verse. I really just wanted to show you how Jesus doesn't say, don't judge. He says how to judge. And what he actually says is, when he says don't judge, what he's actually saying is, don't judge like this, judge like that. That's what he's saying. And that's what I wanted to share with you.